Hi, Owls. This is Mrs. Myers. This week, we're going to be talking about research summary passages on the Science ACT. Plan for this week's lesson. First, we'll talk about how do you know it's a research summary passage. We will review a couple key background information things that you need to know for these passages. We'll talk about some strategy reminders, and then you will do a practice passage. Okay, these research summaries passages are about half of the Science ACT, about 50%. There will be 6 passages that you see. So we think about 3 of them will be research summary passages, okay? You know it's one of these passages because you'll see titles within the passage that say something like experiment 1, experiment 2, or study 1, study 2. There could be 1 study, there could be 2, or there could be up to 3. I've seen 3. Okay, typically it's a paragraph describing what that scientist did, and then maybe a table or a graph or figure with some data or some more information about the study setup. Okay, question types you'll see with these passages. You'll have basic graph and table questions. So what does the data tell us? You'll have why did the experimenter do something questions. So understanding why did they set it up the way they did? What are they trying to learn? And if we change this thing, what would else change in the experiment? So those are the kinds of questions to prepare for. This is what one of those research summary passages will look like. So you can see usually there's an introductory paragraph, and then we see titles, study 1, study 2, study 3. And for each study, it has a short description of what they did and maybe some data. So here we've got a short description and a graph, short description and a line graph, and then lastly for study 3, short description and a table. Okay. Other things that you should know for these. Now, for the Science ACT, you really don't need a lot of background knowledge. There are 40 questions on the Science ACT. Usually you need background science knowledge for 1 or 2 of the questions. The rest of them, the answer is there somewhere in the passage, but these are some good things to know just so that you are comfortable, okay? And pause the video if I go too fast through these. So these are some tools that you should be familiar with. You probably use most of these in class or heard of them at least. pH meter, balance, meter stick, graduated cylinder, calorimeter, telescope, microscope, and thermometer. Make sure you know what units they measure in and what they're for. Sometimes there will be a question that say like, what tool will be most appropriate in this study? Something like that. So just be familiar with these. It helps to know a little bit of background knowledge. And then these are some units to make sure that you're comfortable with. Know what volume, mass, light, atomic mass, power, energy, and length are typically measured in. Okay, so be familiar with these. Again, if you need to pause and kind of review in your head, that's a good idea. And know these prefixes. Every once in a while, I'd say maybe 1 or 2 out of the 40 questions, the Science ACT will ask you to convert, do some really simple math and go between maybe liters and milliliters, okay? So it's good for you to know how to convert back and forth and know these prefixes. Know kilos are big, 1,000 kilos or 1,000 liters is in 1 kilometer or 1 kiloliter. Milliliters, micro, nano, and pico, just know all of these prefixes. And even if you don't have it perfectly memorized, be kind of familiar with what's really big and what's really small. Okay. And again, you don't need this background knowledge very often. It's just good to have in the back of your mind. Parts of experiments. Again, this is fairly uncommon. Every once in a while gets asked, maybe 1 or 2 questions out of the 40, but it's good to know them. You need to know what controls and controlled variables are. Those are the parts of the experiment that are kept the same for every single part of the experiment. So looking down at our example table here, you can see water would be a control. All 4 plants got the same amount of water. Fertilizer is also a control. All 4 plants got 5 grams of fertilizer. Second thing that you need to know for parts of experiments is independent variable. I always tell my students independent I change it. They both start with I. So independent is whatever the scientist is directly changing on purpose. Here looking in this table, I would say the independent variable is the amount of sunlight. You can see each plant got a different amount of sunlight. The scientist changed the sunlight on purpose. Okay, and then last thing you need to know is the dependent variable. Dependent variable is what the scientist is measuring. It is the outcome that changes, that's unpredictable, that changes based on the independent variable. So here we change the amount of sun, that's our IV. We measured the plant growth, that's our DV. And again, I also think in my head, dependent variable data, they both start with D. Okay, so make sure you're familiar with these parts of experiments. They do pop up every once in a while. Okay, and then lastly, some general strategy reminders. Number one, I really recommend don't read the passage. The most you should do with the passage at the beginning maybe is skim it. Be like, oh, okay, what kind of passage is this? Oh, it's a research summary. Okay, how many studies were there? Oh, there were 2 studies. Okay, maybe highlight the titles just so you know where the studies are on the page. And then I would go straight to the questions. Don't waste a lot of time trying to understand the experiment. Okay, second, expect unknown terms. There are going to be some crazy words you've never heard of. They do that on purpose, right? To freak you out. Don't be freaked out. Just be like, don't know what that word is. Let's keep going. And then annotate for number 3, my third tip. Make sure you're writing all over the paper. That's why we give you practices on Jamboard, so you can highlight and underline and annotate. And lastly, my 4th tip is pick the best answer you can, okay? Eliminate answers that you can. Pick your best guess. There's no penalty for wrong answers on the ACT. So if you can narrow it down between 2, that's very good. Pick your best answer and keep moving, keep getting all the points you can. All right, what I want you to do now is you're going to try a research summary practice passage. I want you to pause this video, go to the Jamboard that's linked in the video description on this YouTube channel, on the description, open it up, open up the Jamboard, make sure you're writing all over the practice passage. Give yourself 5 or 6 minutes to work on this passage with a timer, and then unpause the video and you can check your answers. So again, you're pausing the video for 5 or 6 minutes with the timer. All right, these are the practice passage answers. Check your answers. The number one thing I would recommend is make sure for any ones that you missed, figure out what the answer should be and why. Why did you miss it? What should it be and why? That's a really important skill to understand your mistakes and do better next time. All right, that's all I have for this week. Have a great week.